Adams. Thank you for joining us today. We have Bradford Hyde here from Podcast Marketing. I think I can share. Can I share something real quick?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to share really quick, once I get it open here, the podcast marketing that Bradford is part of. And can you guys see that? Bradford, can you see it?
I can. That's
okay.
Yeah. That's Undebatable. That's our podcast, and that's our website. That's where you can. This is a great example of what you can get when you podcast. There's many ways that your podcast can be distributed and played, but having a good central website where all of your episodes are is a great place for people to find you. A great place for Google and other SEO. To pick up on your podcast as well. And then we operate out of the Marina View podcasting studio in Norwich, right here in downtown. And that picture up top there is actually a picture of our studio. That the podcast actually owns the studio. So we decided to start a studio because we felt that there was a need for one in Norwich, and this is the result.
Well, I'm excited to learn a little bit about it because I had gone on there doing a podcast with you, but I honestly didn't know where to look, how to do it. I now have Spotify, so I've actually grown a lot. So, but I look forward to learning a little bit how it can help businesses. And then you were actually explaining to me how it's a whole different reach as well. You know, that you can reach a lot of different people. So it doesn't have to be so specific just right here in our city of Norwich. It can expand, it can really grow your business and to educate people a lot on what's going on around, correct?
Absolutely, for sure. So I have a little slideshow I made. I don't know if it's possible for me to be able to show my screen or not.
Sure as you should be able to share.
Okay, so I will do that right now. Okay, here we go. So can everyone see my screen here?
I can. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so this is just an introduction to podcasting. If it's something that you ever thought you wanted to get into, it's easier than you think. That's the big hint. You just found out the big secret. People pay big money to know that secret. No, I'm just kidding. But it is easier than you think. So we're going to go over everything you need to know about podcasting. This is just a very high-level overview of it. We're going to learn why you should start a podcast, how to start a podcast, and marketing and measuring your podcast. So first off, why even start a podcast? Let's do a quick tutorial on this. But first, a definition. So a digital audio or video file that is a recording, usually part of, I'm trying to move this little, I've got the window up here. I'm trying to see how I can move this to the side. Oh, that's all right. Usually part of a theme series that can be downloaded from a website, media player, or a computer. So that's basically, think of it like a talk show that you can listen to at any time. I like to say that it's like on demand. So it's not like a syndicated TV show where you have to tune in right then and there. Think of it like an audio talk show that you can pull up just like you pull up on Hulu or Netflix, and you can listen to it at any time. You're able to play it from a website. You're able to play it from your phone, your tablet. You can have it in your earphones. A lot of people like to keep busy while listening to a podcast. For example, people who are working will tune into podcasts. People who are working out at the gym will listen to a podcast. People who are cleaning and organizing their home, cooking dinner, there's lots of opportunity to listen to podcasts. What was interesting was there was a study done on folks who work out, and they found out that listening to a podcast actually helped them to mentally escape some of the grueling pain that's associated with working out. When you listen to music and you work out, while the beat kind of keeps you pumped up, you already know the lyrics. You already know what's coming, especially if it's a song that you've heard and listened to a million times. You're not really engaged. You're not really lost in the moment. With a podcast, it's always fresh. It's always new. And so you're tuned in. You're hyper-focused on what you're hearing. So it helps you to escape mentally the workout and the pain and the discomfort associated with it. So you can keep on pressing on and building up your big guns, just like mine. Just kidding. I don't have big guns. Bucket list wish. So it is fast and really easy to record, and lots of people listen to podcasts. So who's really listening to podcasts though? 15% of the American population, that's 40 million people, listen to podcasts. And here's some other cool demographics. So usually podcast listeners spend an average of about 6 hours and 8 minutes each day consuming audio. So that's really, really cool. So, there's lots of time in a day to listen to podcasts, especially if you're working and you're in a position where you can listen while you work. 30% of that time is, of course, spent listening to podcasts. If you look at this breakdown here, AM, FM radio accounts for about 21%, Sirius XM 5%, TV music channels 9%. You can see, I'm not going to go over everything here, but podcasts, 30%, holds the biggest share of that time spent listening to audio. So why start a podcast? Well, we've already discovered that there's an awful lot of people already listening to podcasts. So why not start a podcast? Data proves that people listen to them, and they listen more than any other audio content. So you've got this audience that's already engaged and already has the desire to listen to a podcast. So this is your opportunity to get in front of them with your message. Podcasts give you an opportunity to reach people that traditional text and visual content aren't really reaching. The big thing years ago was blogs. People would write blogs, and people are still writing blogs because it's great for SEO. It helps Google recognize that you're keeping fresh new content and you're hitting those keywords. Google absolutely loves that. Then people started, the next big thing was vlogging. So it's like blogging, but with videos. They'd be making YouTube videos, and everyone had a YouTube channel. But the problem with that is that YouTube became so big and so stock full of channels and videos, and it's really, you're getting buried in a sea of videos. I'm not saying that will never happen with podcasts. It most certainly could, but at this point in time, we're not really at that point. There are, about, I would say, close to 800,000 podcasts out there, which sounds like a lot, but it's far less than there are YouTube channels. And with a simple search in your favorite listening app, you can easily find a podcast that, provides the type of content that you're looking for. Podcasts can work for almost every industry and subject. So if you're a business owner, if you're a small business owner, or you're even a big corporation, then you should definitely decide to start a podcast. Like we said in the beginning, it's really not that difficult, and we're going to go in a little bit into what it's like to start a podcast. But this gives you an opportunity to get your message out to a very engaged group of people. And it doesn't really have to cost you anything to do. It's one of the forms of marketing that is very low cost, and you have a really high return on your investment. We have in our studio, the Marina View podcast studio, we actually have two small business podcasts, and their goal is to help other small businesses. So we have It's Just Business, which is Russ Harlow and Dana Dowdell. And if you know of Pop's Premium Ice Cream, Dan and Mary Ellen Spellman also run a podcast called Pop's Cast Weekly, and that is another small business podcast. And on their podcast, they have everyone from accountants to business attorneys to marketing companies to all of these different great resources that they interview every week that help their audience explore how to start and successfully run a business. And as Dan and Mary Ellen Spellman say, they've been in business long enough where they've been there, done that, made some mistakes, and now they're sharing their experience with others so that they can be successful. But even if you don't want to start a small business podcast, you yourself could have a podcast that's specific to your niche. And we're going to get into that. There's no niche that's too nichey, as I like to say. So there it is. There's no topic that's too nichey. Boom, just like that. There's the slide. So let's say that you're an accountant. You could have a weekly podcast or even a bi-weekly podcast, and every episode could be something different. You could talk about maybe individual tax returns on one episode, and then business tax returns on another, and then maybe write-offs on another, and then bookkeeping on another. Each episode could be a way to inform your audience. Why do this? Where's the value in providing education to your audience? Well, here's where the value is. If you're a business and you're doing business as usual, sort of in the old-fashioned way, and the customer comes to you and they're not really getting a ton of value out of you, then you might not be as successful as a business who is constantly doing value adds for you. I know when I work with a company that's really investing in me, the customer, and I feel like there's a relationship where they want to educate me, I start to build an awful lot of trust. So if I start to subscribe to that business, and every week that business is putting out a podcast that I really enjoy, and I'm learning about that business, next time I need an accountant, and I'm just using an accountant as an example, I'm going to say, well, they've been really helpful. I mean, I've listened to their podcast and I've learned so much. I feel like I trust them. They actually know what they're doing. And I know what they're doing because I listen every week to all of their great tips and advice. So as a business, it really helps you to engage with your customer base, and it really puts you way up here compared to a business who's down here because you're engaging with that audience. You're constantly educating them and giving them information. And because of that, they build trust and rapport with you. And you can't really put a price tag on that. So that's key. If you're thinking, well, great, okay, so you're saying I should start a podcast and talk about stuff. How do I do it? Are they easy? I'm not technical. We get that. You don't really have to be completely technical. If you can operate your cell phone or you can operate a computer, you can do a podcast. You can make it as simple as you want, or you can make it as difficult as you want. The nice thing about the studio is we have some services that can help. So if, let's say you did decide that you wanted to start a podcast, then by coming into our studio, we've already got all the equipment. You don't have to worry about going out and buying really expensive equipment. We already have it there. All you have to do is come in, record, and publish your episode. So it's really, really simple. And like I said, even that process is very simplistic. So here's how to start a podcast. By the way, did I mention it's easy? I think I did, maybe once or twice. It is, it's really easy. First, what you'll need is a podcast toolbox. It's not your typical toolbox. Leave the hammers and screwdrivers alone. You're gonna need first your feed. We call this an RSS feed. Now, I'm not actually completely sure what RSS feed stands for. All I know is that it's an individual feed that helps what we'll call the directories link to your podcast. I like to think of it simply as the web URL. So if I own a website and my website is www.marinaviewstudio.com, then that's my domain name. That's my website address. Feed is the same thing. It's essentially a website address that links the directories like Spotify, iTunes, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music to your podcast. Then you need gear. The gear, of course, is your microphones, your cables, your headphones, all of the things that you need to actually produce your show. And then, of course, your setup. So here's what's in our high-level overview of our studio. We have all of the, we have our room, we have our production equipment, we have the different types of feeds. We get you set up with what is called a host. So you need an actual podcast host. Think of your hard drive on your computer as a means of storing documents. When you write up a Word document, you file, you save it, you probably save it to your computer's hard drive. Well, podcasts, where they sit out there in the technology world, they sit in your host. There's a misconception that your podcast actually sits in Spotify, Pandora, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and that's not true. If they held all of those files, their servers would be massive. Audio files take up so much space and so much room that they would never have the ability to hold all of that. What they do is they rely on a feed to bring it in. So when you go on Spotify, let's say, and you pull up a podcast and you play it, what it's doing is it's streaming the audio into the app and into your ears. But the audio file itself lives in your host. That's where the actual file lives. So we can help you find a host where you can Google. There's a whole bunch of hosts. There's Anchor, there's Buzzsprout, and they're all out there. So you'll be able to host your podcast. So feed, this is how you get listed in the podcast directories. Like I've mentioned, a podcast directory is something like Google Podcast, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher. There's a million out there. If you have a really good host, they can help you get connected with all of the directories so that your podcast can be distributed out to all of those. And that's done through the audio file, which again, we call the RSS feed. So all you have to do is record your podcast, upload the podcast to your host, which automatically connects it to your RSS feed, which thus in turn automatically makes it available on all of the platforms that you're connected with. Super simple. You have to do one thing, record and upload. That's it. Everything else magically happens in the background for you. So there's two ways of doing it. You could rent a studio, like the Marina View Podcast Studio, or you could buy your gear. Buying your gear, you're looking at a bit of an upfront cost investment. So you're looking at buying microphones, you're looking at maybe like a mixing soundboard, recording software, headphones. There are, as I mentioned, right now, roughly about 800,000 podcasts. And there's a brief study done, and they looked at folks who were listening to podcasts, and they said, why did you not continue to listen to that podcast? And they said, well, it wasn't that it wasn't engaging, and it wasn't that it wasn't good content, but there's just something about the audio. I don't know. I feel like I was a little annoyed with the audio. That was enough to make them not want to listen to the podcast. I'm not saying that you have to go out and spend $1 million on equipment, but if you want to stand out, you've got to do it right, and you've got to do it the right way first. First impressions are everything. All it takes is someone listening to your podcast once. If it's not great in terms of the audio quality, it's going to be really hard to reel them back in. So while you can just take out your phone and hit the record button, a lot of phones have recording apps, you could do that, but your audio quality is not going to be good. So take the time, spend a little money up front, and invest in a good quality microphone. It's really important that you hear yourself. So make sure that you have an interface where you can plug earphones in so you can also hear yourself. And of course, a software to be able to take that recording and be able to upload it. Some softwares even allow you to do some minor editing. If you have the right host, then even the host can do some magic on your file to make it sound really, really nice. That's one way of doing it. The other way, if you don't want to spend the upfront money, is to go into a studio like ours, which is a co-op. Everyone shares the cost of renting the studio together. And the more members we have, the lower the price is. And that helps so that you can produce a podcast for a really low monthly fee and not have to worry about paying all of this money to buy the equipment up front. Setup. You need a quiet space. You can do a remote setup where you can find, the absolute perfect room. There's a little image there of our podcast studio. Again, audio quality is the most important. We use Rode microphones, the Rodecaster Pro, which is the soundboard that you see there, good quality Shure S750 headphones, and of course the entire room is soundproofed with that carpeting and then the wall sound tiles so that there's no echo, because we really want to make sure that we have good quality sound. Measuring and marketing a podcast. If I have any marketing friends on the call here, you're going to be familiar with this. Having a podcast doesn't mean that people will actually discover your podcast, nor does it mean that your podcast will be successful. That's a quote by David Gerhardt. Now, what he's basically saying is just like a website. You can build a website. Anyone can build a website. Doesn't mean that your website's going to be found. You do have to do a little work. You have to bring people to your website. SEO, search engine optimization, talk to your marketing friends who can help you market your podcast. I'm not great on the marketing end, but I know of great marketers who can help you market your podcast. So, how can I market? And how can I measure my podcast? How do I know if it's doing well? Well, think about SEO, first of all. Lots of softwares out there allow you to take your audio file and turn it into a transcript. So not only do you publish weekly audio clips or your weekly episodes, but you can take those weekly audio episodes, put it through a software that listens to the episode and then transcribes it into like an article, a written article. And you can take that article and post it on your podcast's website. What does that do? Well, it says to Google, hey, look, I've got this fresh new written content every single week, which, by the way, anyone in marketing and SEO knows Google loves that. And if you've got that fresh marketing content, and oftentimes the softwares will pick out keywords. So they'll say, oh, you've mentioned the word business a lot, and you've mentioned small business, and you've mentioned finance, and you've mentioned taxes. So I'm guessing that the whole point of this episode is probably about small business finance and taxes. So it'll pick out keywords too to help draw people. So when they're going on Google and they're saying, I need to know about small business finances, perhaps your episode will come up in the results, and then they can listen or just read your episode as an article. Have a website for your podcast. You can either build a website. There's actually a website out there, or a website company, that takes your RSS feed and builds a customized website for you. It literally takes that address that we talked about earlier, and it builds a website. It imports all of your episodes, and it, on its own, very simply, creates an entire website for you. You don't have to do anything. It's super simple. Again, I told you, there's so many great technologies that have come out and vlogging. They don't have all of these like little aids to help you make your thing successful, but podcasts have so many supportive apps and programs that revolve around them that creating one is so simple and doesn't really take a lot of your time. Track your growth and downloads. If you have a really good podcast host, your podcast host will help you track downloads. Every single time someone clicks and listens, it'll track it. I can tell from my podcast who's listening, what country they're in, what web browser they used, what tablet or phone or computer they use. Are they on a desktop? Are they on a phone? Is it Microsoft Office? Microsoft Windows based? Is it a PC based? Is it Linux? I can track all of that. So I know exactly who my listeners are. And if I see, wow, I've got a lot of people listening through iTunes, so I'm going to really focus on my iTunes crowd. Or I've got a lot of people listening through Spotify, so maybe I'm going to find out my demographic about that Spotify type of demographic and really try to gear my my program about them. But here's the other great thing that you can do with those numbers. That data is really important because you can take that data and then you can monetize your podcast. So we have some people that rent the studio that don't actually pay for their monthly rent on the studio because they monetize their podcast. They simply ask the community businesses if they would mind sponsoring. The business gets exposure because they get this custom commercial, there's advertisement, and it's a little bit more different than a radio advertisement in that, you know, people build a rapport with the host of the podcast. And usually the commercials are done by the host of the podcast themselves. So the listener who's already got a rapport with the host is now hearing from the host about this benefit, this product, this company. And also it's how the advertisements are done. They're not read like your typical advertisement that you'd hear on the radio or on the TV where they're like, you know, come on down to, you know, car dealer X. We have great deals all week long. Savings, savings, savings on big Toyotas, Prius. Come, you know, the typical commercial, right? It's very different. It's actually the host talking to you as if you were just having a conversation. So they'd say, hey, Jerry, you know, I have to tell you, the other day I went down to X Toyota dealer and I got a great deal on a car. No way. Did you really? Yeah. You won't believe it. I got like, what was it? 0% financing for 24 months. Oh my God. How much you have to put down? Like pretty much nothing. Yeah. Jerry there really hooked me up. You should go see him. So it's a very different type of ad read where the people feel very connected to the ad and they can sort of consume it in a more digestible way, if that makes sense. So the ads on podcasts are really different. So a lot of local businesses love to advertise because they've got this captive audience. And here's the other thing about advertising on a podcast. I call the advertisements legacy ads. When you hear an advertisement in other forms of media, once you've heard that advertisement, if they change that commercial or if that company decides not to advertise anymore, that ad goes away. So let's say that Sears and Roebuck, if they were around still, let's say that they decided to stop doing ads. I can't turn the radio on now and hear an ad for Sears. But if Sears was in business still, but they stopped doing ads, at least on a podcast, if I listen to that episode, I'm still hearing that ad. So for a business that's in business, they pay for the ad once, but it's legacy. It lives on that podcast. So if I listen to the podcast even 3 years after it's out and I hear, you know, Joe Schmo's, you know, restaurant, well, I'm like, oh, I got to try that restaurant out. So your ad lives forever. So people in businesses love to advertise on podcasts. So it's very easy for you to monetize the podcast. You can consider cross promotion. A lot of podcasts will talk about other podcasts on their podcasts, especially when you're starting out and you're trying to look for an audience to build. Go to like-minded podcasts. So any other podcast that talks about, you know, the same thing you do, maybe, they'll say, hey, you know, if you've enjoyed our business podcast, check out this business podcast with other great tips. Now, if you're a business, that might not work out, but you can go to like a small business podcast that talks about small business or another niche that maybe mutually works where you could advertise their podcast. So I've said an awful lot. Are you ready to get started? Do you want to grow and reach an audience? Yes, we do. Exactly. But how do you do it, right? Well, find a studio or do it on your own. And then just create your podcast, record and publish. It's truly that easy. So thank you for listening to me blab. It's a lot more entertaining when I'm speaking on a podcast and when I'm doing this, I'm finding. So hopefully I haven't bored y'all. But happy podcasting. And I know that we've probably got lots of questions. I tried to get through that in a half hour, so I'd have a half hour to answer questions. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Does anybody have any questions from our guests here today? Well, Bradford, I already told you, I'm always like kind of, I was nervous about the podcasting. I thought it was live at the time, and then he had mentioned it wasn't. So that kind of takes a little bit of pressure off of it. You know, we've talked a little bit about doing podcasts maybe with our chamber members and such, and I love interviewing people. So I'm definitely going to look into it. But Maria, do you do a lot with podcasting, you know, with your marketing background and such, or is this fairly new for you as well?
Yeah, it's a little bit newer. We've been talking about putting one, I mean, because I do a ton of content. So we've been talking about turning that into a podcast. So, this was all very interesting for me. So I'll probably, maybe Bradford and I can have a conversation about space and things like that. But yeah, so Bradford, so here's a question. So
Sure.
if I want to go and start a podcast, so what's my best? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it bi-weekly? How do we maintain our listenership?
Absolutely. So I would say it really is based on the type of podcast that you're doing. You don't want people to forget that you exist. So I would really stay away from doing like a once monthly podcast. It's just not enough for the listener. I feel like I would be like, oh God, now I got to wait a month. And if it's something that I'm really into, maybe I would wait a month. But also during that time, I could totally forget about you because now I'm listening to a podcast that's out more regularly. If you're really busy and you don't have the bandwidth or the capacity, you could do a podcast every 2 weeks. I will tell you the most popular form of podcast is once weekly. And with the once weekly podcast, there's a few different ways that you can produce the podcast. Again, this is all about your bandwidth and your capacity, but it also kind of has to do with the type of podcast you are. My podcast that I'm on with 3 other hosts is a hot topics podcast. So we always talk about the latest hot topics in the news, what's trending for stories. For us, we have to produce a fresh episode once a week. There's no questions asked. If we were to what I call stockpile, where you just record a whole bunch at once and then you slowly release them weekly, that wouldn't work for us because the topic is no longer fresh or new. It's no longer breaking news. It's old news. So we are in a position where we have to record at least once a week and publish. And we have to publish right away, again, so that it's, fresh new content. If you are doing a series where, for example, maybe you're a small business like a bank and you want to talk about home mortgages on one episode, and then the next episode is about CDs, and then the next episode is about personal savings and checking account. The next one's about, but you get what I'm saying. You can record those all in one day. You can record, 6 episodes if you wanted in one day, and then slowly drip those out once a week. So it really depends on the type of podcast that you're doing and your bandwidth. But I would recommend at least once a week to keep your listeners engaged and active.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Another question.
Sure.
So, what's the so if we were gonna do our own studio, whatever, what is that equipment gonna run us versus what would it cost to, for example, rent studio space from Chelsea Harbor Tower?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. So, again, I was saying you could go as simple as recording to your phone and just using like earbuds. And everyone on here, I think, I know all of you. I'm a very positive and optimistic person. I always hope for the best. But I also have to be real. You're not really going to get anywhere doing that. You're going to get a few listeners. It's not going to gain traction. It's just not the quality of audio that you need. So it is something that you'd have to invest in upfront. We spend around $5,000 on equipment to start our studio. Those padded sound absorbing tiles on the wall are extremely expensive. They're foam. I mean, you would think that they'd be like 10 cents each. Oh no, they're really, really expensive. The equipment, the mics, the soundboard, all of that. So collectively, like I said, we spend around $5,000. Not everyone has $5,000 to drop up front. What makes sense for a lot of people, and I'm not just saying this because I actually own the studio, but like I said, we're not a nonprofit, but we're not out for profit. We split. It's a co-op. So every time we get a member, everyone's price goes down because we're just trying to basically cover the cost so that we can all do our podcasts and not have to pay these exorbitant fees. Right now, to cover our rent, we're currently at $265 a month, $265 a month. We find that usually about anywhere from like 6 to 9 months in, people, or even sooner, people are able to have their podcast monetized where they're having advertisements on it so that they don't actually have to pay that any longer. And it covers the cost of renting the studio. And even, maybe 2 years down, when you've got lots of listeners, the more listeners you have, the more you can charge for ads. So people end up making their money back that they spent on renting the studio even beforehand when they didn't have ads. So that's the whole reason we created a studio, because it just makes more sense to share in something and split it than it does to go out and do it on your own and spend that cost up front.
We have a guest in here.
Hi,
Would like to ask a
Bradford. How
question.
you doing?
Hey there, good. How are you?
Good. I got to the party a little late here. I came in here to chat with Angie about something, and I overheard this whole thing, so I kind of answered a couple of these questions already. But so what? I mean, if you were to define what a successful group of listeners is it 50? Is it 100? At what point do you get enough population to watch it where it's worthwhile to continue? So if I do a podcast and I got 12 people, I would imagine that probably isn't a good return on that time effort. What is kind of the standard for that? What's your thoughts?
Right. So, it's honestly one of those things where it really depends on what your individual goals are. There are some people that, and I'm not saying this, these are their exact words, I just love to hear myself talk. So I just like to, literally people, they have a podcast because they just enjoy what they're doing and they don't care if one person listens or 500, they're happy. Now for a business who's trying to do this, again, it's going to depend on what your goal is. Do you want 100 listeners? Do you want 500 listeners? What would be successful to you? I can tell you that honestly, when a podcast first starts out, it takes a little while to build that traction. And it's going to depend again on how well you're marketing that podcast.
Right.
And
So
the quality of your audio. But I would say you want a good, at first you're going to probably have about 100 listeners per episode. You want to get to a point where you're at least like, I would say 500 to 1,000 per episode.
okay.
When we say per episode, what we mean is that initial launch. So there's a 30-day period of that episode's launch. So within 30 days of you publishing that episode, you get, 100 listeners, let's say. So, and then of course it only accumulates, I can listen to a podcast right now that was published 8 years ago and it goes into the count. So
when you do them, and again, you might have said this, and I apologize if I wasn't here to hear it, but so when you do these, is it video and audio or is it solely audio?
Nope, it would just be audio. So a podcast is really just audio. A video and audio would be a vlog. That would be like if you wanted to do something on YouTube, which is lessening in popularity. So podcasts are right now where it's at. And I'll explain, if I may, real quickly, the reason behind that. So when you watch a video, it requires you to do a few different things. You have to look and listen and absorb and digest. So you're doing 3 things. If you're working or you're working out or you're cleaning your closet, you can't be looking and listening and digesting. You can only be listening and digesting. So the reason why podcasts are so popular now is because people are finding, you can ask anybody, right? There's just never enough time in the day. People are trying to multitask and do a million things at once. So if they can listen and they can get content and they don't have to watch, it's a win. So, podcasts can be listened to while you're driving, working, cleaning, working out, whatever. You can listen to a podcast pretty much. So that's why they're so
That's
popular.
cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Great questions. Everyone's great questions. Anybody else have any questions?
don't think so.
Very good. Well, if you have any questions about starting a podcast or you're interested, definitely don't hesitate to let me know.
Bradford, how do they get hold of you?
Sure, you can go to marinaviewstudio.com, and also you can write to us at hello@marinaviewstudio.com, and you can connect with me on Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm also on those sources as well.
Good. They can also contact the chamber, norwichchamber.com, and we can get you the information to get back to Bradford as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
So,
yeah, the studio is operated under Soundflash Events. Like many people, we had to find out like a unique way to sort of survive COVID, since we weren't doing any events or anything.
sure.
Initially, the studio started out as like helping us keep afloat, but now that we're starting to get back, we're looking to build membership and just keep bringing the price down so that the co-op, so that everyone in there.
No, I love it. I love the name too, Marina View.
That's cool.
I love that because I hadn't seen that logo yet. So
Yeah, when you look out the window, you look right over the Norwich.
I know.
That's awesome.
And it's just,
Now it's beautiful.
it's in the B2B Center, the Norwich B2B Center on 65 Main Street.
You guys are our neighbors. So
Yeah,
I think it's great. And, I think you hit it on the head too when you said that, you had to pivot a little bit, right? Through the whole pandemic and such. And I think that you're very creative to create this. You also opened up a lot of doors for a lot of people to help. And you got a lot of people working with you and collaborating with you. So great job on that, Bradford.
thank you. Absolutely. If you're a nonprofit, I think we'll be in a position once we have like another, like maybe member or two, we'll be in a position where, if you're an actual nonprofit and you're trying to get the word out to help your nonprofit, I'd like to offer the studio for free. So, if you listen to this recorded webinar in a month or two from now, check in with us. And if there's any open in time slots, which I'm sure there will be, we'll be able to help you out, because I want to use this as a vehicle to help the community as well.
A lot of nonprofits, they weren't able to run their events as well in order to get the extra cash that they needed. So very
Right.
nice. We'll definitely get this out there for people. We'll put it on the chamber's site and in our social media as well. So again, if nobody has any questions, I really appreciate everybody coming on. Miria, as always, thank you for being you and pulling it all together. And Bradford Hyde, thank you so much.
Great job.
Great job.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day.
You as well. Take care.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.